From the Central American migrant caravan to the so-called refugee crisis in Europe, the large groups of people displaced around the world, namely refugees and asylum seekers, constitutes a key contradiction of globalization. Increased intensity and density in the flow of goods, information, and peoples meets the incongruity of unequal access to the same goods and information. Complicating the mix are harsher controls on mobility emerging from discriminatory systems of security and border control. One example of these can be found in the multiple biometric technologies used to manage the mobility and enclosure of bodies aimed at increasing the efficiency, security, and safety on and across borders. Based on biological and behavioral characteristics of individuals such as fingerprint, voice, or face recognition, these tools turn bodies into data so that identities can be verified and movements tracked. Combining digital technologies, data integration, and managerial expertise in the politics of border management, such biometric modalities have extended the governing of mobility into domains that regulate multiple aspects of daily life. As scholar Louisa Moore argues, this biometric border can be best understood as an exercise of biopower, such that the body itself is inscribed with and demarcates a continual crossing of multiple encoded boundaries. Rather than taking place in specific geographic or territorial sites, la frontera portátil, in the words of cultural theorist Carlos Monsiváis, is everywhere. Thus, the biometric border is the portable border per excellence carried by mobile human bodies at the same time as it is deployed to divide bodies at international boundaries, airports, railway stations, and other border localities. This notion of embodied borders expands traditional understandings of borders as unfixed and fluid sites that are continuously made and remade through the regulation of racialized, gendered, and class bodies. The management of migration flows through the control and circulation of bodies also calls for the attention to the porosity of the body's surface and the fluidity of its boundaries, especially the boundaries between the material body and the world, the self and the other. Thinking about the materiality of the skin as a boundary object and as a liminal site of exposure or connectedness asks us to consider how the borders between bodies are unstable and already marked by social differences that refuse to be contained on the inside or on the outside of bodies. To focus on skin as a porous, fleshy interface between bodies and worlds is to trace linkages between bodies under temporal and spatial dimensions. It allows us to consider how human skin carries traces of other contexts in the very living materiality of its forms. In this regard, anthropologist Vanessa Agard-Jones's research on the relationship to bodily contamination by a pesticide once used widely on the banana plantations in the Caribbean island of Martinique seems pertinent. Addressing how bodies are entangled with chemical and toxic elements in the environment via a theorization of the effects of colonial violence, Agard-Jones makes a compelling argument for the ways in which the understanding of the porosity of the body's boundaries offers a space to think not only about how bodies are constituted biologically and discursively, but how they remain inextricably entwined with the forces of capital and labor. So how does thinking about the constitutive work of bodies in the making of borders help us to interrogate issues of sovereign power, state violence, and coloniality? How can a focus on micro and macro processes of circulation help us understand the relationship between bodies and, say, political or economic world systems? Without eliding the real state violence that does ensue due to the policing of national boundaries, can an embodied understanding of borders help us to imagine border zones more creatively, as a fluid environment rather than as a contentious space constructed by political powers? The talks that follow interrogate bodies and borders from different angles. Max Jorge Hinderer Cruz thinks through the political constitution of the body or person, through the relation between borders and permeability, and Achille Mbembe takes up the power of the border in its capacity to regulate the distribution of populations in the earth. These brief 15-minute presentations will preface a conversation followed by a dialogue with the audience. Please help me welcome Max Jorge Hindera Cruz and Achille Membe.